At one point, our lead detective took me out on the rooftop, and he was standing there with two other detectives, and I was like, what is going on? I didn't know. But then when I looked up and he was, had his arm crossed with the left hand over the top of the right arm, I did not want to hear what he had to say.
Warning. The podcast you're about to listen to may contain graphic descriptions of violent assaults, murder, and adult language. Listener discretion is advised.
Welcome to the Murder Police Podcast, the Unsolved Murder of David Kelm, Part 1 of 2. Welcome to the Murder Police Podcast. I am Wendy.
And I'm David.
Today we are going to be discussing the April 23rd, 2019 murder of David Kelm in Lexington, Kentucky. We have with us today David's sister, Rachel, and David's mother, Jessica. Rachel, thank you for coming. How are you doing today?
I'm good, Wendy. Thank you and David for having me.
You are most welcome. Jessica, thank you for coming. How are you today?
I'm doing good, thank you. And thank you and David both for having me.
Absolutely. This is a case that we're happy to discuss and get into and share with people David's story and subsequently David's murder. It is unsolved still to this date, so I think all of our common goal is to find a lead to maybe help solve this murder.
That and to memorialize David. We appreciate the opportunity to let people know who David is through your eyes and family, so that because in this whole process, that gets lost. The hope again is to maybe budge the case and get somebody held accountable for it. But even in the criminal justice system, when you start to get some relief from having that, it'll still scoot past who David is. So this is an opportunity to really let people know who David is.
Well, I agree. Well, why don't we have one of the two of you or both to chime in and tell us, I guess, Jessica, we should start with you. You're his mother. Tell us David as a little David, when he was a child growing up, what kind of baby he was. Just tell us a little bit about him so our listeners can learn who he was.
Okay. He was my first blessing in life. He was born January the 11th, 1973, all 9 pounds and 5 ounces. In Ann Arbor, Michigan. When he was born, he was a thumbsucker. And when they'd bring the babies down to feed, I could hear him sucking his thumb. And he sucked his thumb till he was about 8. And we had to get some sauce, hot sauce or something to put on his finger. And finally, but he didn't have to have braces. But he was a good baby. He was a big baby. He ate well. He played well by himself, and he loved his baby sister when she came along 3 years later. And they had a bond from day one, and they did till the day we lost him.
How long were you in labor with David? Did he make you wait?
Oh, Lord. It was induced 13 hours.
Oh, my. Yeah, what's that comedian say one time, that there's things that feel good that I want to do for 4 hours. So
yeah,
what a long time. And I was just curious if he made you work for it. And I guess he did.
Oh yeah, he did. And his dad was standing there, and he had a magazine, and he said, "Look at this. This is funny." And I go, "Don't show me that again." And I told the doctor, I said, "Gosh, that hurt." And she goes, "Well, we didn't know you were going to have a football player." Oh, yeah. He loved his sister. He was real protective of Rachel. And they had a bond that nobody could break, even in death.
Yeah, he was just a great big brother.
What's your earliest memory of David? Can you think back that far?
I remember when he fell out of the tree in the front yard and broke his leg.
How old was he?
He was 8. Yeah, he was 8. And
He was climbing in the tree, and I went to the front door, and it was a little tree, but he was high up in the tree. And I said, "You get out of that tree before you break your leg." I turned around, and this blood-curdling scream. I thought he was hit by a Mack truck, and he fell and broke his leg.
What part of his leg broke, and how bad was it?
It was the left leg. He had to have a cast. I had to take him to the emergency room, but it wasn't a compound fracture. And he screamed because they had to set it,
yeah, and my dad liked to draw, so he drew a Darth Vader on his cast. I remember that.
And Mickey Mouse.
A Mickey Mouse on mine. I had to have a
Correction.
a cast on my leg for.
She was pigeon-toed.
And
Do they still call it that?
Yeah. She had a foot. Well, she gets it from me because I have it. And they say it comes from Native American. They were all pigeon-toed, so.
But anyway, I remember my dad drawing Darth Vader on Davy's cast and then Mickey Mouse on mine. So, and we actually kept the cast for a long time. But Davy was kind of, he didn't really want me to, we loved each other. He didn't really want to be bothered with me, though.
He played a lot by himself. He liked Tonka trucks.
Okay.
And I said, "Do you really like those trucks?" And he goes, "Yeah." He said, I like those trucks. And I said, "Oh, okay, you're going to be a cement truck driver?" He said, "No, I'm going to be the truck."
Oh, wow. Yeah. Life goals. Exactly.
You got to have them.
Yeah. And I remember Halloween, he was probably 7 maybe. And he dressed up as Popeye. And I was a gypsy.
Loved Popeye.
I remember that. And we had a dog, Bojo. That was in Michigan. I used to run away a lot. I'd climb the fence and run down the street to a lake that was close by our house. And Davy fell in the ice, didn't he? On the behind the house, the pond.
How old were you when you'd run away? 5?
Oh,
She was younger than that, probably about 3.
Where were you going?
To the lake.
to the lake.
She went down to the lake. And what was so bad, her timing, there was a child serial kidnapper / murderer. Well, I couldn't find her. And something told me to go to the lake. And there she was with a little stick drawing in the sand and swinging.
And Bojo.
And Bojo.
Our
No
dog.
fear. No fear.
Yeah.
Yeah, she would run away.
Yeah, so I kind of just followed Davy.
Mm-hmm.
I remember we were on the swing set and they kept saying, "Say the cuss word." They wanted me to cuss. Of course, they wouldn't. So I said the cuss word and then I got in trouble.
The bar of soap.
Yeah.
We used to
Mom.
do that. My youngest brother, we would send him into my mother loaded with foul language, and he didn't know what it meant just to watch the explosion when he
Yeah.
would do it. So it was like,
Just to watch you get in trouble. Yeah.
oh, for sure, for sure.
One time, Davy got real upset with me because I had just gotten Rachel a little tricycle, and she left it behind the car, and I backed out and ran over it. Oh, he was so angry. "You just bought that for her." She didn't care.
She had a lake to go to.
Yeah,
On a
right.
stick.
Exactly.
So how long were you all in Michigan before you came to Kentucky, and what brought you all here?
Excuse me. The economy was bad, and I was a hairdresser, cosmetologist, stylist, whatever they want to call me. And I came to Kentucky to take a test to be a cosmetologist. And I had relatives here. My dad was from Breathitt County, and my mother was from Rowan County. So I had a lot of relatives down here. And I brought Rachel and Davy with me. He was 7, and Rachel was 4. And I met Michael's dad.
Tell our listeners who Michael is.
Michael is my youngest son. His dad was from Kentucky, and we were married 17 years. I have 8 biological grandchildren and 1 great-granddaughter.
How old is your great-granddaughter?
She was a year old in June.
Well, you talked about how he played with the trucks and wanted to be the truck. And what other things did he do when he was little as he grew up? Did he start to get any sports or any hobbies or anything?
He didn't really like sports. I put him in Little League baseball, and that didn't last very long.
Just didn't have an interest in it?
No, he didn't.
Mm-hmm.
He also got into karate.
Karate. He was good in that at Sentei's that used to be in Lexington.
And Shantae, yeah.
How about
martial arts?
How about school when you got to Lexington? What schools was he in?
Nicholasville we came to.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah. He did well in school. He was good. And he met his high school sweetheart there, Angela Owens. And they had my 2 first grandsons together, and they were together 16 or 17 years, but we always stayed very good friends with Angela.
Well, yeah, that's an interesting part about this too, that we need to let everybody know what that connection is that Angie, as Wendy knows her, lost her life in February in Nicholasville to domestic violence, and we have a few episodes to memorialize Angie and that violent death that she went through. Just to tie this together, as we're sitting in a room with people that were related, and of course that was the high school sweetheart. It's just never ceases to amaze me how there's a connection between people sometimes.
Well, and ironically, Angie and I, as I said on that podcast we did about her, we worked at Long John's corporate office, and that's where years ago I met Jessica and Rachel. So we had initially met back in, I guess, 91, 92. And of course, Angie and I remained friends. And then Angie and David years later did divorce. And it's so funny how I lost contact with Rachel and Jessica. And then maybe a little before David died, we got brought back together on Facebook, and then friended each other like you do, and caught up, and I guess the rest is history, so they say. But, the 3 of us would often talk about the relationship that Angie was in with her new husband, and how we all knew it was a very volatile, not good relationship. And then them losing David, and how that affected all of them. And Angie came back to you all at David's death. There was a little bit of a reunion, wasn't there?
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
For that month and a half before that got abruptly cut short.
Right.
So,
yes.
So it was really neat to bring you all back together, because you all had also lost contact with her, for years.
Mm-hmm.
Yes,
that's true.
I still remember in the wake of David's death, when I was just being made aware of it, is that Angie came to the house one night.
Well, she called. She called early in the morning, crying, saying David's been killed. She saw it, and then I think she reached out to maybe Rachel, because I was getting ready to get my son ready for school, and she never would call that early. So when the phone's ringing at 6, you know something's not right. She was bawling, and I remember asking you, is there anything that you can find out about this? Because at that time, I believe you might have been over that unit, or maybe you were a commander over another sector. But yeah, and then she did come over, you're right. And we sat down and talked about what could be done and how we could solve this, and ways that we could all pitch together. Because even though I hadn't seen David in all those years, we kind of all grew up in those, late teen, early 20s, with she and I being friends, and with the birth of their 2 sons and their wedding, and, helping her plan all that, and the baby showers. So there were great memories with David there as well. And so it was, it didn't affect me, obviously, like it affected those of you who he's your son, but there was still that pain in knowing what you all were going through. And because I did know him, and because Angie, despite being divorced from him for all those years, she was beside herself because they were just truly high school sweethearts, weren't they?
Yes, absolutely. But, David, I remember talking to you first.
Right.
And in our conversation, you said, or I told you I was David's mother.
Right.
And you said, I can't wait to tell my wife that I know you and you were David's mother. And we talked for a long time.
We did. And again, there's that circle, right, of how these connections end up.
Yeah, and Mom said, "Oh my gosh, Rachel, Wendy, or David, when I talked to David, his wife is Wendy, and that was Angie's best friend. We had lunch with her at Long John's, in the corporate office."
Yes.
And I was like, "No way." But I do remember that call. Angie was one of the ones that I first called when I found out about Davy. It was like 4 a.m, but I was just thinking about my nephews, and I was like, I'm calling her, and she took it like the rest of it. She was very upset.
Yes, she was hysterical.
When she came over one night and we sat up in the kitchen, she had a notebook and pages of notes. And I think really it was cathartic for her to bounce those things off, stuff that we've all talked about since then too, and just and for me to watch that for somebody that had been divorced as long as they had been, it struck her hard. Well, let's kind of pick it up a little bit. Then is that he marries, and how long were they married again?
About 17 years.
Wow, long time.
So unfortunately, Angie and David did divorce. The boys were young. I think the youngest was 7, 8 months when they separated,
right.
and the oldest was roughly 3-ish. And Angie moved on and remarried. And so what happened to David at that point? Because I kind of lost track of him then. I know initially there was a little bit of time sharing with the boys. I think a lot of it, Rachel, was organized at your house. And where did his life go after they separated?
Yes, Davy ended up remarrying. He worked at UPS since he was 17. And he also worked part-time at Green's Toyota in the parts department. And he met a lady there who he later, he remarried. And they had a son together, one of my nephews. And then they just, had their life. They were married for 17 years.
So David goes ahead and remarries, has another child. I do recall he and Angie initially, before he had that child, shared custody for a little bit. I think some of those transactions you helped organize.
Oh, yes. Yep. Davy and the boys would come and stay at my house on every other weekend. And it was, I looked forward to it. It was so fun. I got to spend time with my nephews and my brother. And at the time, my little brother lived with me. So it was the whole package right there. But yeah, we spent a lot of time together.
And then eventually those visits kind of tapered off.
Yes, they did.
Well, as an adult, did he have any other hobbies? Because you talked about how he worked at UPS and Green's Toyota, but did he engage in any other hobbies or interests as an adult? Oh,
he's always loved music. He plays the guitar, and he can play the acoustic and electric guitar. He, I guess, comes by that naturally. Our dad's side of the family, back to my grandpa's grandpa, have an ear for music and a talent, and he enjoyed all music. Of course, we were raised on Hank Williams Jr., Elvis, Motown, all that. So
when music was music.
Yeah, but being, kids of the 90s, 80s, 90s, We liked all the classic rock. So he enjoyed music. He liked to work on things, cars, and
He was a perfectionist.
Yeah,
I
he
mean,
was.
any little thing in the house, if there was a mark, he would repaint the whole wall.
Yeah, he also was into landscaping. We actually worked for a company, the Gardener of Lexington. It's not in business anymore, but he enjoyed his lawn and landscape being perfect, and he'd come over and do mine. He also liked crime TV. He always liked the case, Crystal Rogers case was going on. And he would call Mom, and I was like, "Oh my gosh, did you see this? This new part of it, the show?" And he's like, he did it, and just going crazy about it. He enjoyed that. He remodeled his house. He put in tile floors, and he stayed busy. He was one that he didn't sit still. He was like my little brother. They don't sit still.
So he goes through this marriage, and he's married for a while, and then they had some rocky issues and separated. And then they were estranged when David was murdered. Is that right? They were not together at that point?
No, they were not.
Okay. So on this night, leading up to this, April 23rd of 2019, how did you all find out about it? How'd you learn of it?
Well, Landon and I were actually just getting in bed, and there was a knock at the door, and I thought, it was somebody at the wrong house. So I didn't open the door, and then they come to the back, and they were banging, and I seen flashlights, and I was like, what is going on? So I opened the door, and it was an officer, and he said, or he had my nephew with him, my youngest nephew. I didn't know what was going on. I figured my brother was at work still for him to show up in the police car, or I didn't know what happened, what was going on. So the officer asked me if I could keep my nephew.
And this is David's youngest son with his new wife, right?
Yes. And I kind of was still in shock. I didn't know why. And I said, what's going on? And he said, well, we cannot reach his mother. We have tried to reach out to the mother. She's nowhere to be found. So we didn't know what was up with her. I didn't know what was going on. So he had to stay with me.
Did the officer tell you at that point what was going on?
No. Just that he needed to stay with me, that he couldn't reach his mother. So I said, okay. And then the officer quickly came back and told me that, he came back and told me that I needed to follow him to the police station and bring my nephew, because he had to have an adult with him. He was there.
He was there when the murder happened?
Yes. And so I was like, what are we doing? And the officer said, your brother's been shot. He's on his way to the hospital. We need you to bring your nephew to the police station. And so we did. We followed him, or he followed us to the police station.
You brought Landon to my apartment.
Yeah, I had to.
What's going on? She goes, Mom, Davy's been shot. We always called him Davy. I know you probably picked up on that. I did. I gave him that name. And I go, shot? And I'm thinking, he works for a United Parcel. So maybe there was a robbery in his truck,
Yeah.
And it's not going to be so bad.
It just launches you into those questions because you're trying to figure out, I'm trying to put myself in your shoes, where the police show up. They've got a relative there that then they ask you to follow down, and then they finally tell you that he'd been shot and was going to the hospital, and the imagination just has to go wild.
About what time of evening was it, Rachel?
This was about 10 o'clock, maybe something a little bit to 10 o'clock. And of course, I'm sure he had to tell me a couple times that he got shot because I'm looking around for my shoes and I can't find them. And they're like right by the door. I was so upset. I mean, I couldn't believe. All I kept hearing in my mind was, your brother's shot. Your brother just got shot. Your brother just got shot.
So you didn't know his condition at that time. You just knew he had been shot and you were going to the police station.
Yes. I wanted to go to the hospital to be with my brother, to find out what's going on. But circumstance, I had to take my nephew. If been able to get a hold of his mother, I could have went to the hospital and be with my brother in his last minutes.
So, Jessica, did you go with Rachel or did you meet her there?
Rachel brought her son to my apartment so she could go with my grandson that was there at the murder.
Yeah, even if they just were having a conversation, that's
right.
That's the crux of it, is having an adult when they're under 18. So
he was a minor, yeah.
Yeah, and that's pretty important.
Or juvenile, they said, yeah.
And there it is, the needs of the system stepped in front of what you would have liked to do of his sister, which I'm sorry that you even went through that, that's where these things collide, kind of like we hinted to before.
So when did you get into the story of what happened? When you got to the police station, did they give you details of how this night unfolded?
No. I was kind of learning as being in the questioning room.
Had you asked your nephew as you were driving what was going on?
Yes,
what did he
I
tell
did
you?
ask him. I said, "What is going on? What happened?" And he said, "Daddy got shot." And I mean, he was in shock. I was in shock. So at one point, our lead detective took me out on the rooftop, and he was standing there with two other detectives, and I was like, what is going on? I didn't know. But then when I looked up and he was, had his arm crossed with the left hand over the top of the right arm, I did not want to hear what he had to say.
Hey, there's more to the story, so go download the next episode like the true crime fan that you are.
The Murder Police podcast is hosted by Wendy and David Lyons and was created to honor the lives of crime victims, so their names are never forgotten. It is produced, recorded, and edited by David Lyons. The Murder Police podcast can be found on your favorite Apple or Android podcast platform, as well as at murderpolicepodcast.com, where you will find show notes, transcripts, information about our presenters, and a link to the official Murder Police Podcast merch store, where you can purchase a huge variety of Murder Police Podcast swag. We are also on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube, which is closed caption for those that are hearing impaired. Just search for the Murder Police Podcast and you will find us. If you have enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe for more and give us 5 stars and a written review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you download your podcasts. Make sure you set your player to automatically download new episodes so you get the new ones as soon as they drop. And please tell your friends. Lock it down, Judy.